Okay, thank you for coming. So Parshas Vayeishev. Rashi begins the parsha with a mashal that we have to go through the generations and the history of Esav before we come to discussing the generations of Yaakov Avinu and Klal Yisrael. And the mashal that Rashi gives is, it's like searching for a pearl through the sand. You have to spread out all the sand, go through all the sand, and you finally arrive at that pearl. You can take the pearl and you can appreciate it for what it is. And really, this is a lesson for us in Geula, in Gullus in general, in our hope and our belief in the Geula coming, despite the dark times that we live in, despite the immorality that surrounds us. We have to recognize that the Geula is coming, it's going to come. And we have to understand that many times the most precious things come from dark situations. We find Yehuda and Tamar in this week's Parsha, which ultimately gives birth to Mashiach. We find Yosef at the end of the Parsha being locked up in jail. So there's a lot of Geula. And obviously Yosef sets the stage for the brothers being able to come to Mitzrayim, etc. So there's a lot of geula that comes from initial periods of darkness. That really is a whole shmooze in and of itself. But I want to take one piece from that. You also see that there's a value in something being hidden. Something special, the pearl, the bracha, perhaps the talent you might have. Something good about you. There's nothing inherent in trying to spread that as much as humanly possible. A person having self-confidence within himself would allow a person to say, yeah, I'm talented in something. Doesn't mean I have to go around showing everyone. If it's something that could be misamech people, make people happy, it's something that can help people, it's something that can help myself, build myself, of course, people should embrace their talents, use them and develop them, for sure. But it's not that I need to publicize. Everything that I have on the inside needs to be brought out to the outside. There's a cheshivas to the overall concept of tznius. Especially when it comes to bracha. That bracha exists more when something is samui mina ayin, not in the public view. Anytime it makes sense for something to be in the public view, there's no taina. There's not a problem that it is. But we don't look to try to put it out there without a good reason. Tznius in general, of course, applies to men as well. And how we dress, and how we act, and how we speak. And it also applies, of course, even perhaps more classically, the concept to women. So I want to address a question that was asked on this related topic. And that's what I want to talk to you about for tonight. This is a topic that we covered last year. How many people by a raise of hand were in my chabura last year in 10th grade? So this will be a chazar for many of you. It's a good thing. These are complex topics. And as you get older and wiser, you'll have more questions and more, perhaps deeper understanding of the concepts that we're discussing. So it's worthwhile to go over. We'll talk tonight about the question of, is it okay to have a friend that is a girl? Of course, that's not applicable to anyone in this room, of course. It's only applicable to maybe friends that you might have, and you want to give them advice and guidance in their challenges in life, and you want to make sure they have the right hashkafos. So, of course, if I ever slip and say you, I really mean them. And so let's discuss, how does the Torah look at it? Let's take some time in discussing how I think psychology looks at it, and let's bring it all together at the end. So the first thing that we have to know on this topic is that a person always has to be a mensch. There's a famous question and answer period on Friday night with Reb Tzvi years ago when I was a bacher, where somebody said there was once a maisa, a story where a bacher was on a date with a girl, and everything was going okay. It wasn't great, it was okay, and then all of a sudden, like 20 minutes in, the girl was just totally quiet and trying to just say yes or no to every question, like, so you grew up in this place? Yeah. And like, what'd you like about that? It was okay. You like ice cream? Yeah. What's your favorite flavor? Yeah. So, it just really wasn't going, obviously. The guy wasn't sure what was happening, and after like another amount of time, and it got awkward enough, the guy said, like, what's going on? So she said, what happened is that the only heter for me to speak to a boy is if we're seriously considering marrying each other. I've decided after 20 minutes of us talking that I'm not going to marry you, so I don't have a heter to talk to you anymore. So after Tzvi finished laughing, the Bacher was asking Tzvi what he thought about that. After he finished laughing, he said in Yiddish, Medaf zayin a mensch. You still have to be a mensch. Yes, that's true. That's what facilitated. That's the heter that got you together into the hotel lounge. But you still have to be a mensch. You still have to be nice, polite. And so that's like the premise of the whole talk that should never be confused with anything that I might be saying. You always have to be a mensch. Always. And that is an overriding feature of Yiddishkeit. And the Bein Adam L'Chavero. And so while we're going to make limitations in Gedarim for what's appropriate but what's not appropriate, the basic guidelines of living in a society and being a mensch are generally going to be appropriate. Could you come up with crazy cases? Yeah, of course you could. But let's talk about in the realm of regular, normal cases. Now we have to start in understanding, let's talk about the halachic perspective. So the halacha says like this: every single girl that is 12 years old and up is bechezkas a nida. She is bechezkas that she became a nida, that she became an adult woman in that sense of the word, in her body, and therefore she has something called tumas nida. Once she is that, and that's from 12 and up, which is presumably anything that we would be dealing with, at that point, she becomes what the Torah refers to as an erva, because there are two types of girls, as far as the Torah is concerned, and as far as Isser v'Heter is concerned. There's erva, and there's non-erva. There are girls that maybe there are certain Yisurim in terms of doing certain things and acting certain levels of inappropriateness, but then there's erva, which has chiyuvei misa and krisus, etc., associated with them, depending on which one you do. And nida is listed there amongst the arayos. It is an erva. So the first thing we have to understand is that we can even apply the chomer of Yargval Yavor to the erva of nida, because after all, gilui arayos, meaning the arayos, the erva, plural, is applicable to Yargval Yavor. The person is told, I'm going to shoot you unless you have relations with that erva. You have to let yourself die. Like avodah zarah and shvichas damim, like avodah zarah and murder. So there's an amazing Gemara in Sanhedrin at the end of Perek Ben Tzorah, where the Gemara says, let's say you have a hypothetical case. Okay, now is this case true or not? It's a good debate. But no matter what you say on that debate, it is correct and appropriate, and you might find this throughout the Gemara, in all the Masechtas, that the Gemara will find the most extreme cases, not because we really think that's going to happen, or even if it did happen, it's going to happen again, but because we want to explore the parameters of the halacha. And the best way to explore when does the halacha apply until is to take the most extreme case and say, oh, it doesn't apply there, so we know at least to cut off the line at that point. It's a very logical way of exploring the limitations and parameters of any particular halacha. So when it comes to arayos and Yargval Yavor, the Gemara says, what if you have an amazing case where a man is dying, and the only way that he will be able to be cured is if he has relations with an erva? So the Gemara says right away, Yargval Yavor, he has to die. It's one of the big three averos. Well, what if all he needs to do is see her undressed, see her in a priestess way? That will cure him from dying. So Gemara says, and this is important, that arayos goes beyond, because the Torah says, lo sikrevu legalos ervasa, don't come close. So arayos includes the lo sikrevu, don't come close to do arayos. Included literally in arayos is even things that are close to arayos. And therefore, that would certainly apply. Looking at her undressed would apply. And therefore, in the Yargval Yavor of arayos, it would be included, he has to die and not look at her undressed. Says the Gemara, let's go one step further. Let's say he just wants to speak to her behind the fence. That's the lashon of the Gemara, to speak to her behind the fence. Can he speak to her behind the fence, this erva, to save his life? The Gemara says that's still included in lo sikrevu, don't come close, that's still coming close, and therefore it would be Yarog Val Yavor. And that is what we call in Chazal as abizrayu de arayis. It's like the dust, it's like the extension of arayis, but it is included even in the chomer, the stringency of yarag val yavar. An amazing thing. So we have to understand that every girl we're dealing with is an erva. And we have a Gemara in Sanhedrin saying that when you're dealing with an erva, even certain type of talk, we have to define what it means to not speak behind the fence. We have to understand what that means. But certain even talking is included in the chomer of yarog val yavor, of misa, and the highest of the highest punishments and levels of avera. That's number one. Number two, we have to understand that when it comes to nashim, when it comes to the taiva of nashim, when it comes to arayas and these inyanim, there's only one area in the entire Torah where the Torah seems with a da'oraisa to be making a siyag, to be making a fence for the avera. Generally, it's the Rabbanan. It's the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Asu siyag l'Torah. It's the rabbi's job to make fences for the Torah. Oh, it says that you should not do this, not steal. Don't even do something that might not be stealing, because you should distance yourself even more. Make a fence. Make fences around all the averos so you don't end up doing the averos. That's what the Rabbanan teach us to do, and it's a very important thing to do. But there's one area that the Torah itself seems to make a fence. Where is that? What is with the Isser of Yichud? Now, there might be many reasons for it, but on the surface, it certainly seems that the Isser of Yichud is a fence for the Isser of Arayos. It's don't be alone in a room where there's low traffic and most likely no one's coming in or the door is locked with an erva. Now, I could be reading a book on one side of the room. She could be reading a book on the other side. We could have our backs towards each other. And I just transgressed an Isser Deoraisa of Yichud. Why? Because that's coming too close, so to speak. That's not making the appropriate fence around the Isser of Erva, of Arayas. Why is this the only place that we find the Torah seemingly making a fence around its own Isser of Erva? And it's a Deoraisa to do Yichud. I would think a simple explanation is because the taiva is so strong, because people lose themselves so quickly and so dramatically when they allow themselves to get swept up in the taiva of taivas nashim, that they do crazy things really quickly. And the Torah is saying a simple idea in human psychology: stay further away. Don't even be in the room with the woman. What? I'm just going to be in the room? Nothing. Hopefully none of you even know what's going on in the political climate in this country during these days, months, but you see respectable, civilized, happily married, or at least on the outside we think they are, certainly respectable families that they've grown, older people. They seem to have their lives together. And it's like you scratch beneath the surface a little bit and all this crazy stuff is going on. Okay, so we don't know when the accusations are for sure true and when not, but certainly some of them are true. Some of them they're basically admitting to. That's an amazing thing. These are the people in the highest echelons of our society, in our highest buildings of government, that we look to, at least maybe we used to look to, for guidance, and even some people might even look to them for moral guidance. There are certainly people in this country who still look at the forefathers of this country, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and then a little later Abraham Lincoln, and the great people from our past, they look to as great moral figures, and for all I know they were. But that carries on, and all of a sudden we see these people in similar positions, and it's all crumbling in front of us with immorality. It's an amazing thing, and it all revolves, at least what's going on in today's current events, it all revolves around Taivas Nashim. We have to be so careful with how emotionally charged and powerful this Taiva is. That's number two. So we put these two things together, and we understand from the halacha how serious we have to be and how seriously careful we have to be when it comes to girls. So let's go back to our first question on the first part of the halacha, which is, how do we define what it means to speak behind the fence? Because that we're saying is literally a yag v'yavor. So we could for sure say what it is on one end of the spectrum. We could for sure say what it isn't on the other end of the spectrum. And then we could have a discussion about what it might or might not be in the middle. It for sure includes literally talking about doing inappropriate things with that girl. There's no way to get closer to doing it with just talking. It for sure does not include saying, excuse me, when you're walking down the sidewalk, or asking her to pass the ketchup because it's closer to her at a restaurant or even at a Shabbos table. But now, how do we define the middle ground? Where do we draw the line? And the short answer to that is, I don't know exactly where to draw the line, but we can all have basically good ideas. For example, if you decide you want to have a friend that's a girl. Now, by definition, having a friend means you talk, you communicate. There's no such thing as, oh yeah, that's my friend, I never said a word to them. It's a contradiction. It's a steer minei obey. It means you relate to that person. You relate through doing things together, speaking together. So you have a friend that's a girl. What do you do with her? Or one of your friends has a friend that's a girl. What do they do with her? They talk, hang out, talk. So when they're talking, what are the topics of conversation? If they're only talking about sports, that's it. That's the nature of the conversation, that's it. And it's an analytical conversation as to whether or not Joe Flacco is now going to start to play better in this season. If that's what the conversation is about, it's probably okay. It's most probably not what the Gemara is referring to as having a conversation with her behind the fence. However, how far is that conversation when it's a guy with a girl, talking about sports, it's enjoyable? How far is that conversation from, say, oh, and I have a friend that happens to be going out with your friend? Okay? That's not a big jump in conversation. We're not talking about us. It's not about us. No, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do Averis. We're just talking about, I have a friend who happens to be boyfriend, girlfriend with you have a friend. How about that? Is that now talking behind the fence? Well, now you're all of a sudden talking about more of a love, romance, inappropriate between them maybe, but not us. So, okay, still a gray area, but certainly getting closer to what we would for sure say is inappropriate. Now, how far is that conversation from at least thoughts occurring to you and her? I mean, after you're a boy, she's a girl, you're talking about guys and girls going out with each other. I mean, the cholent has all the ingredients for the conversation very easily and smoothly transforming into us. At least some feelings, some thoughts. And that could be then turned into, even if it doesn't get discussed explicitly, the undercurrent feeling in the conversation, where in the back of your mind, in the back of her mind, you know that those are the feelings, but you're still kind of talking about football, but not, etc., etc. So obviously there's a lot of gray area, but very, very quickly, conversations can turn from, let's call them more innocent, fun topics, to not so innocent, pretty inappropriate, almost probably, almost definitely, what the Gemara is saying is Yarog va'al Yavor. You should really take a bullet before doing that. That's pretty serious. So, we have to be careful. So let's just give a couple of examples. It's impossible to be able to exactly be magdir al pi halacha where to draw the line, like I'm showing you. But we can have a pretty good idea. Say your sister invites a friend over to the house. And she comes to the Shabbos table with you. So again, she says, pass the ketchup. You don't have to pass the ketchup to your left so that it makes its way all the way around the table and then back to her. You don't have to do that. You can hand her the ketchup. It's fine. Let's say she asks a question. She raises a point at the table that her teacher might have raised on the parsha or something. And you have something to say on it. You could say something on it at the table. It's fine. But let's say that same situation, your sister says, I invited a friend over. And you're just curious, which friend? And she says, oh, this person. Oh, okay. No, this person. Oh. And an opportunity comes up for you to answer that parsha question that she answered. And you feel inside of yourself, it's all about being honest with yourself. Like, oh, this is a great opportunity. Well, why is it all of a sudden a great opportunity? A lot of times you won't really realize exactly what your train of thought is. But if you ask yourself just one small question, like, why am I a little bit more excited about answering this Parsha question than any other Parsha question my parents ever asked me in the past at the Shabbos table ever? Maybe there's something to do with the person asking the question. And so that's just one tiny example. But to be honest with yourself and to recognize that, and in that case, maybe it would be appropriate to not answer the Parsha question at the time. If you're really, really upset about Bittul Torah, just say some Tehillim in your head or something. It's okay. You can be honest with yourself in assessing, is there some reason why I'm a little bit more happy about this event taking place? And that's in a very neutral setting of a Shabbos meal. Certainly, if there are groups of guys and girls getting together in order to hang out with each other and converse with each other and discuss things with each other, again, unless it's like some type of college debate team or there's some type of unique purpose to the meeting, if it's just to hang out and have fun, what is the purpose of that? The purpose of that obviously is to build reyus, is to build, and a light definition, ahava. It doesn't have to mean crazy deep levels of love, but real closer friendships. The purpose is to develop the friendships, and you're getting closer and closer and closer to what? To erva mamish, to a potential yarg val yavor, even just through speech. Certainly we don't have to get into touch. Let's not even go there. The way the question that's asked to me in our circles generally isn't even about that. It's about just talking. So we have to know, even just talking, you have to be careful. That's the halachic piece. Let's talk for a couple minutes about the humanistic piece, right? Obviously, none of what I discussed with you until now would I ever tell the guy who comes to me asking for advice. This doesn't apply to him. You say, Gilui Arayos, the truth is, does apply to him in the Sheva Mitzvahs to B'nai Noach. The question is whether Nida applies, and to what extent Yarg Val Yaver will apply. Those are all interesting questions. Let's assume the halachic piece doesn't apply to him. If it does, great. Then I'll say this to him too. But there's a whole other piece to this conversation. And that is just being a healthy human being. What do I mean? You have to know. And I'm really speaking to two different types of people. Again, I'm assuming everyone in this room is one type. But one type of person is, they never had relationships or friendships with girls. They're not looking for it. Maybe they know of people who have, but that's not them. So this is tremendous chizik, especially what I'm about to say, I find many times, to those people to not be like, oh, I might be missing out on something. Sometimes halacha works for that. Sometimes halacha is hard to ease those emotions. But I want to tell you a whole other piece to this. And then, of course, there are those who are involved in it, and this is something which they should consider. And that is, the Ribbono Shel Olam designed purposely when he created the world, and he created man and woman. In fact, some Farshim say he purposely created man and woman as one being and then separated Chava from Adam in order that it would be so biologically inherent in the man and woman that they would desire each other to come back together again. Because they were one. It's like a whole different level of, and that's perhaps part of the reason why the taiva is so strong and can corrupt such people in such drastic ways. So Hashem made it that the emotions are very strong between a man and a woman. Not the moment you see them necessarily. There can be sometimes things that draw a person, but they can develop quickly. When your intention is to develop, they have tremendous, let's call it siyata d'shmaya. When it's an avera, it might be the opposite, whatever that's called. But there's a tremendous koach in the bria for that relationship and friendliness and all that to develop fast, especially when your intention is to get together, get to know each other. So the emotions are very powerful and strong in this whole relationship. The overwhelming majority of cases when a guy in high school goes out with, let's call it, a girl in high school, is that they do not get married. There's a special term in the secular world for guys and girls that end up getting married when they met in high school called high school sweethearts. The reason why there's a term for it is because it's unique and rare. Most of the time that does not happen. The vast majority of the time that does not happen. And so now let's think about what exactly is the pleasure that you're investing in right now in having a girlfriend. Let's leave halacha aside. Let's leave all that stuff aside. Let's just talk from a practical human being perspective. You like eating cholent? What's the downside? At your age, very little. As you get older, maybe more. But there's a pretty decent cost-benefit analysis when it comes to should I eat something geschmack or not. It's good. I like it. I enjoy it. Not much downside. Is there any downside towards developing and having relationships with girls at your age? Almost always it will not. Way, way, way into the 90%, it's not going to end up in marriage. And if it does, by the way, it really might not have been the right person, because think about it. You develop all those emotions at a much more immature state of mind. Who says that you were able to use the right criteria? In fact, for the guy, it was probably the first girl that their opportunity came his way. For the girl, maybe not, but she also has an extremely immature frame of mind. So there you are. It's nothing to do with marriage. Let's be honest. All these emotions are there. The general rule is there is way more pain and suffering in such a relationship than pleasure. And hear me clearly. Remember, this is for you to tell your friends. That means, I'm not saying there's no pleasure. By definition, the sentence I said is not saying there's no pleasure. There's pleasure in the relationship. There are good feelings in the relationship. Powerfully good feelings. But as powerful as those are, in the relationship itself, there will be times of disappointment and friction and issues, which, because there's such powerful feelings, which could be so good, it's so heart-achingly painful. So heart-achingly painful. And when the relationship ends, even if the guy ends it, it can be devastatingly painful to even the guy for days and days and sometimes weeks. It can destroy a person. When you take a sum total of the pleasure and pain in that relationship, it's not clear at all which one's bigger and which one's higher at all. Oh, in the beginning, it's exciting. You have to know. Is it good tasting poison? Or is it something that's ultimately good for you? It's not. And so, what I would assume that everyone's in that first category of people, you might be at times, maybe I'm wrong, but some guys definitely express to me at times, I feel like I might be missing out from what some of my friends might have. They might be in more modern places, and that's what people do. There's a lot of pain in the going out and breaking up and finding a new one, going out, and the jealousies, and there's so much that goes on in those situations. That is a very important first humanistic piece. Next thing, guys will always say, well, I'm not going to be dangerous or go crazy with it. I'm going to set a limit. I won't go beyond that limit. I won't go beyond that with the girl. Whatever that limit is. So, there you go. You're not going to go beyond that. Here's how limits work in psychology. And we're all human beings, so we all are subject to psychology. You're over here, all the way on the left side of the spectrum. You set a limit on the right side of the spectrum. Let's call it, with my hands on the desk here, 2 feet away. Now, every few inches is another thing that you could do with the girl. That brings you closer and closer to that limit that you said, I won't go past that. When you first set that limit, it's like, of course I'm not going to pass that limit. It's 2 feet away on my range of things, of what I could do. It's ridiculous. It's so far away. There's like 10 things I could do before that. So you do step 1 and step 2 and step 3, 7, 8. Now you're only, 3 inches away from that limit. That limit stops looking too scary now. You're pretty close to it. You think that you're going to have the same koach to withstand the desire to cross the limit when you're right up to the limit than when you were way far away and you first set that limit? I believe the person saying to me, I'm never going to do that. He really means it. He's confident about it. I believe it. But things change and then minds change. It happens all the time. And then you will cross that limit. It's just the way human beings work. So if you think you're not going to do certain things originally, you're wrong. That's especially in this category where the emotions are so strong. Lastly, every single one of those things that you do serves to make the purpose of this taiva, of these emotions. Marriage less and less special. It's only a matter of time, a few years, the right amount of years, definitely not before, you got to be into your 20s, let's call it, to be safe. Some people argue that it should be right away at 20, let's say. Some people argue it should be 23, 24. Everyone's different and everyone has to get advice at that time. But a certain amount of years, we're talking about, for you guys are what, at least 15, 16, 17, right? So we're talking about less than 10 years. Less than 10 years away from marriage. Amir Hashem. All at the right time. And once you're there, you want it all to be new with that person that you are hopefully going to spend the rest of your life with. So you say, oh, I'm only going to hold hands with this girl. So great, when you hold hands with your wife, she's the second girl that you're holding hands with. Or, generally, if at your age you're starting to hold hands with girls, the 35th girl that you're holding hands with. But even if she's only the second, it's still less special. Well, does that mean you're going to get divorced? Of course not. But recognize, every time you cross another line, do another act, speak in another way, have another friendship with a girl, you're making the ultimate friendship and experience with a girl less and less special. And marriage has the potential to be the most special, happiest, fulfilling relationship in your life. And the more special you make it, the more special it will be. Why would you want to decrease any of that for the short term, often bringing you to cross limits that you didn't want to cross in the first place, filled with plenty of pain and sorrow and heartache, short-term pleasure? You want that to take away from the decades and decades of Mirz Hashem, amazing relationship and special relationship with your wife, and marriage and family? So there's a lot to think about, even outside of the halacha. We discussed the halacha and how stringent it could be in certain cases and how careful we have to be with it. But even outside, from a humanistic perspective, from a psychological perspective, from a marriage perspective, how appropriate and good it is, how beneficial it is to us to wait. Have a little patience. At the right time, it will be incredible. And so we all act with tznius. We keep these things more hidden. And we save them for the appropriate relationships, husband and wife. Just like that pearl is buried in the sand. Klal Yisrael gets dug up from the sand. The Geula comes from the darkness. And in fact, it's no coincidence that Chanukah was a Yom Tov that was established after we lost the Batei Mikdashos. We come to Chanukah, and it gives us literally and spiritually light in the middle of these long, dark winter nights. And it's hard to maintain the emunah and the strength and the chizuk for yeshiva bacher and a longer zman now. Yeah, you have the off Shabbosim, but from the major breaks of Sukkot and Pesach, it's a longer zman. It's Chanukah that serves at the very least as the mashal with its light. And really, in a ruchniistic way, it really truly does infuse us with greater chizuk and strength. We have to try our best to recognize what is good for us and what is not good for us, even though we might have certain urges and desires. So I think that's a basic overview of this topic. And Amir Hashem, through us, being able to ask the right questions, right? Like I mentioned before, specific cases come up all the time. You have to ask. There's no way to address all the specific questions and cases that come up. But through being zohir, through being careful in it, through showing Hashem, we want to keep what's supposed to be private, private. We want to act with tznius. We want to maintain that mashal of the pearl in the sand, that the Ribbono Shel Olam will grasp that pearl and bring it out with the greatest light even brighter than the light of the Chanukah menorah. It should be that already this Chanukah, Hashem, now we should be zocheh that the whole Chanukah will be celebrated in the great light of Mashiach Tzidkenu in Yerushalayim Habnuya B'Meher V'Yameinu Amen.